First up, we've got Pipe Dreams, PVC extension possibilities. I'm sure you're all both going to be very interested in what's going to be presented in both of these sessions. Just a reminder, please keep your cameras and microphones off for the duration. We will have 5 minutes remaining for questions at the end of each session. And if you join us late, the sessions will be available on YouTube just shortly after they are completed. So I'm going to get out of the way and turn it over to CSABA and Dylan.
Yeah, welcome everyone. It's good to have a couple of people listen to our presentation, and I hope you guys had a really good time earlier today with the other presentation and recitals. So I'm Chaba, and we are doing this with Dylan Findley. He's from Wisconsin, or right now Ohio, and I'm from Arizona. We'd like to talk about how PVC pipes can be used to extend the range of the clarinet, create different sounds, and what are the possibilities, what are the things we have tried and did work, and what are the things we have tried and did not work. First of all, so creating a PVC extension for the clarinet, whether between the mouthpiece and the upper joint, as a type of a barrel, or attaching the PVC pipes to the end of the lower joint, between the lower joint and the bell, are different possibilities. These are the two possibilities that we have fiddled with Dylan. First of all, it's very easy to get PVC pipes, Home Depot, Lowe's, any hardware store you go out there, or garden, you can get them. The type of PVC pipes that we have used are 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, and then 2 inch pipe diameter. Let's go on some of the tools. I just want to give a little bit of practical background. Once you obviously buy the piping, you need to measure it and cut it. So I use this air die grinder with a 3-inch grinder head to cut. I didn't have other things, and I had to use this Dremel tool with this filer head to grind on inside for some of those pipes to fit the mouthpiece tenon, as well as the upper tenon of the upper joint. Some of the things that I don't recommend is reciprocating saw or circular saw. They can really break the piping. Pipe cutter in hardware store works. I didn't have that, so that's why I use those that I had. Obviously, measuring stick to measure the tone hole distances and those cuts that we need to make to be able to get close to a diatonic range extension on the clarinet, and a chart for pitch range. So let's head to the very beginning. In the summer, I and Dylan composed a piece that we use pipe extension for. It's called a Spacing Race. Prior to that, I had performed Eric Mandat's Double Life, where in the second movement you have to use pipe extension that goes down to the low C, or the C below the low E on the clarinet, adding C, C sharp, and D notes to the clarinet. So that really sparked our interest to further that research and see what else we can do with PVC pipes. What we wanted to first figure out, if you can actually use a T piping system in which we can attach the mouthpiece, and we can attach two different clarinets, so A and a B flat clarinet, which I am doing right now. Now, in theory, so this is what it looks like. A little bit away. It's a funky shape, but we have only one resonator, so we are thinking about that before we compose the piece, that it might really not work at all, since one resonator resonates the two clarinets. the stronger resonance, the stronger note will come out of it. And so but in any case, we tried it, and we want to have the experience and also learn how to sound. So here we are. I'm gonna blow it for you guys to see. I'll just put it down a little bit. So I'm using my right hand to close up the holes on the upper joint. So while there's only one note that sounds, which is as a matter of course fact, we have only one reed to resonate the two instruments. We have actually a nice multiphonic range of notes that we can use. So it wasn't completely futile experience, but it wasn't also the thing that we tried to get, which is two notes at the same time. Now, we also tried putting a little bit of Scotch tape on this end of the piping, essentially closing the hole and creating a closed end pipe. And this is what we got from it. So it's even less range of notes, but the Scotch tape acts as another resonator. So very limited note. We can produce about 5-6 different notes in a close range, and we have this resonator pad added onto that. So this is something we didn't count with, actually, that would sound anything. Just wanted to close it up. Now some of these pipes, this one actually, if you see, there's no imprint on it, so it closes the whole thing. Some of the pipe endings, they have prints, numbers and letters on it, and so when you put the Scotch tape, it resonates. The tape resonates even better because the it just lets it the pipe ending, not flat ending, lets the tape resonate pretty good. Now some of the modifications I have to do, and I have to tell you. So this is a T pipe, 3/4 inch on both sides and 1/2 inch on the top side. Now I had to grind the inside, if you can see a little bit, so that it can fit onto the mouthpiece tenon. Also, I bought the 3/4 pipe that is a thinner pipe. And I still had to grind it to be able to fit on the upper tenon of the upper joint, but they very snugly fit. So that is some of the modifications we had to do. This is pretty much the upper modification that we could do with the clarinet, whether one clarinet or two clarinets at the same time attached to the mouthpiece. So while I'm preparing this, the next insert, so it's going to be a 3/4 T that I'm attaching to the lower tenon of the lower joint, and about this long. Now I don't know how long this is. When I did this, when I made it, we measured it according to the tone holes diagram of the clarinet, and I'm going to add 2 other T pipes and a 3/4 extension. Now the way we measured and counted that, this is almost as long as the clarinet itself. This is when I take it away from the clarinet. So we wanted to create, we wanted to go down to low E, which is I believe in the 2nd register E. We could not do that. We tried different formations, and I'm going to show a little bit more PVC pipes that we tried. we could not go down more than the low A, so the A in the second register, and it seems to be the cutoff point for the clarinet, for B-flat clarinet, due to the bore size mostly. So with this extension, we have been able to go down. The first hole, PVC hole, will create a low C sound because of the added pipe length right here. So when I cover this hole, this is where the air will escape. And when I cover this, obviously next, and when I cover this hole, the air comes out at the very end. And I'm going to try to show that with the camera as much as possible. And I'm covering the next holes. Depending on how well I can cover the last hole, which is hard with 2 legs, comes at either A, low A, or low A flat note. So this is the lowest. If you want to be closer, the one that I just played, the lowest note was A flat down below the E. So this is really much the end of the clarinet that we could produce. If we put on an even longer end of the pipe below that, I have to really wiggle here. Sorry, you won't be able to see this. It does not go down, so you can see that an E sounds just a regular E, low E on the clarinet, instead of the E in the second register that should sound. So the E on the third register, which is the normal range of the clarinet, it hits back and it would not go down to lower register notes, because that is the end of the clarinet's bore limits and range. I have also, and I'm going to, as much as you can see, I try to put a 3/4 pipe on the clarinet, which is this that I have used before, and I thought, well, let's try out if I put an extension which would be 1 inch in size and 1 1/4 inch in size, whether that would help the clarinet make those sounds lower. And here's the T of the 1 1/4 inch right here, and then the regular 3/4 T connection, and this is what comes out of it. Now this is really long. A tritone down, which is A flat from the E, which is the lowest note that we could create out of this instrument, even with the conical extension. Let's just get it right. actually, wow, this is the first time something came out of it. Wow, this sounds like Jason's contrabass clarinet. Whew. So this is a new thing I haven't been able to produce before, so I'm really excited about this. So it even goes down to the first register. Oh, actually, the lowest part of the second register. I want to add a 1.5 inch pipe, also with a tone hole. I just couldn't do that. Nothing would come out, as well as to the 2 inch extension. So I have to say, after this new tone that it just came out today in a very low register of the second register, I'm really excited to maybe ask someone to help me cover those additional holes with the hands and feet to see if we can produce anything further than that. But before, it was only A flat in the second register that we could produce, which is a minor third lower than Mozart had basse horn or basse clarinet notes written for. As Stephen Fox, Canadian clarinet maker, he puts it on his website. He makes basse clarinets out of A clarinets. A couple of years ago, it used to be about $1,500 for extension, and he would create chromatically down to C. But he writes it that they are speculating that the basse horn Mozart wrote the clarinet concerto actually went down to low B, not C. So Dylan, would you like to take over from here a little bit?
Yes, that'd be lovely, but I'm very excited the conical thing might start working. So yeah, so we did a lot of experiments talking over Zoom. It's interesting how we can do that now. So we talked a lot about maybe the acoustics and the different ideas with the resonators and with like we were talking about with the conical shape, thinking about maybe how are the acoustics translating. And since we're not professional acousticians, we've been just tinkering, which is the best. So some other things that we were able to figure out, I don't know if you're like me, but I love multiphonics. So, you know, I have right here an extension that should be about an A, covering my tone hole. So here's my E going to my A. And then because we have such a low note, what I've noticed just playing on my clarinet in those low notes, even without an extension, is very easy to get those kind of multiphonics out simply by changing your, you know, internal mouth position, right, your tongue position and other elements of your embouchure. So that is something that I've had fun playing with, is the multiphonics. And, you know, so easy to pull into those multiphonics. I'm not sure how many partials I could go up, but I think there's a lot of potential there, just going way up in the partials, very high. You could probably easily play entire melodies just on partials, which is kind of exciting to me. The other thing that you could go really close to that is this kind of didgeridooing that you can do on these low notes as well, right? You're in that range. So you might as well, while you're doing multiphonics, try to change the tone color again by changing your embouchure, going loose and firm. I tried pulling off the mouthpiece so that I could buzz into it, but which does work actually really well if you're on an E, the lowest on the clarinet, but unfortunately that wasn't working so well with the extension on it. But still you can kind of get the same effect with your normal mouthpiece using the reed. So I don't know. I mean, you probably have to decide what you want to do with that, but by changing that, you can get those kind of small sound distortions as you play. And then again, you have full access to a very wide range of multiphonics. And, you know, we talked about, Chaba was talking about the measurements between the holes and that giving you diatonic pitches or whatever you'd like. Of course, that means you can go microtonally as well. So I can imagine if you're into low microtonal music, having multiple clarinets that have different tone hole tunings would give you very interesting results if you're interested in creating some serious beating between those intervals. Now, some of the limits that we have on this, we've kind of talked about a lot of these. Obviously, there's some speed limits, right? You can only move your legs so fast if you have the multiple notes. So that's going to be one of the issues that you might run into, is that you can't play these low notes as fast as you might be able to do with, you know, your normal notes in the clarinet. We've been talking about that lower pitch limit, and there's a lot of questions coming. We will answer them at the end. So there's a lower pitch limit, nothing below A2, we've been saying A flat, and apparently with the conical, we might be able to get lower. And I think that has a lot to do with our embouchure as well in this. So I think as you do this and you practice your embouchure, we might be able to kind of figure out the right way to use your mouth to get to those really low notes that we're not used to having our mouth prepared for. The number of tone holes, there's only so many holes you can cover with your legs. So Chaba, I think you said 4 is about how many that you feel like would be the limit before you can't really do too much with that anymore. So, and then thinking about it physically, right? How your legs bend versus how your instrument might bend. You can actually use some pipe joints to go different directions, but thinking about how you can cover those holes is a real logistical concern that you have to be aware of. And then we also said there's not really any trilling between the tone holes. I was trying something out that actually was working all right with the trill in a sense, just being allowed to use the multiphonic ideas in that. So I'm going to be trilling my low A and going, you know, with my pinky between the E and the F. So you can do some kind of drills and figure it out, but it's going to be very hard to get down to that A every time, just simply because, again, the mouth position is going to be a little bit tricky there. But it is possible maybe to do tremolo between some of these lower notes and one of your normal lower notes, like an F or a G. That's possible, but it might be hard to do some other situations, especially trilling between the extension tone holes, because these gigantic circles would be you'd be doing a real fun dance with your legs to try that out. So Chaba mentioned Stephen Fox as an interesting person to look up and learn more about these kind of modifications that you could be doing. And I'd like to throw in Lindsay Pollock as well. I mean, you might have seen the meme kind of thing now with the carrot clarinet and such, where you just take a mouthpiece and you can literally put a mouthpiece on anything. Sometimes it seems like with Lindsay Pollock and create those sounds. What I'd love to say about his website that's kind of cool is that he does have the instruments on there, and some of them are kind of ridiculous, but he also has measurements on there, and you can download this like $5 book of different measurements. So if you want to experiment and try these things out, and you want to know where to put your tone holes, his website does offer some insights into how to do those things.
On that note, yeah. I would like to say I am going to copy and paste a website here. There's another book from H.A. Benad, Case Institute of Technology. It's from 1960, December. It's a 14-page document that talks about tone hole placement specific to the clarinets. And one of the things that Dylan didn't mention is 3D printing. Now with the technique in 3D printing, I think possibilities are opening up. So instead of buying the stock PVC pipe, we can make something out of 3D printer that would be actually easier for the legs to cover. Now we also know that with a little bit of work, we'd be able to do a tone hole like cups over the tone holes, so that you just have to slide over it, and then it perfectly closes that. So it's not in the not in the way of lower notes. Now, one thing that I was thinking while Dylan was saying his words is that I did file my reed a little bit more than I did earlier, so that might have been one reason why the very low note came out with a conical shape today. So that might be something and of consideration when we extend the clarinet and play with multiphonics. As we all know, a softer reed resonates easier and ignites those upper partials.
All right, well, we have a lot of questions we can answer, and there's a lot of them already in the chat. So where were they? So would the wider tubes work with bass or alto clarinet? I would assume so, right? We'd have just to measure what those measurements would be between the joints. So when we measure it, Shaba, how are you measuring it exactly when you use like a measuring stick?
So I have a digital caliper, and I just put it on it, whether inside the bore or outside of the on the tenon. It's not with me, but it's a regular $15, $20 digital caliper. Now, what I noticed that where's my mouthpiece? I don't find my mouthpiece. It's okay, right here. So the tenon of the mouthpiece is 7/8. And you can't find, so the outer diameter is 7/8. So I actually had to file the 1.5 inch opening inside to match that 7/8. Also, the upper tenon on the clarinet upper joint is between 7/8 and 8/8, somewhere in halfway. So I, even with the really thin 3/4 pipes, I had to grind it inside so that it would snugly fit. So these are some of the measurement that I specifically had to look for and do, and there was nothing out there. What was the question, Dylan, that you read? Because that
was probably answering it. So it was, would the wider tubes work with bass or alto clarinet? And I mean, I think the answer would be definitely, but it'd have to be one of those wider ones. I wonder, bass clarinet is pretty big, so I bet that would be the widest one you have over there.
The widest?
Those. Yeah, like, you know,
okay.
The widest diameter.
Yeah, it's 2 inch all the way down. So when I look at the largest diameter pipe that I bought, I wanted to do all the way from 3/4 or 7/8 all the way down to 2 inch. So there's another question. I was very curious, why PVC coating? Well, simply that kind of worked. The 3/4 perfectly fits to the end of the clarinet, so we just try to do that with that. It's also a consideration to do that with brass fittings, but it's a little bit harder to well, cut it and solder it. So it takes a lot more work. The easiest, more handy is pretty much PVC pipe, and that's the reason. It's easy to cut, it's easy to get a T-joint for it, and it's easy to grind it inside. We don't need soldering tools for that, which you would do, or at least a flame bottle for soldering the brass pipe. It does alter the sound, so it sounds different, definitely different. So you can hear that, and if you put a different material pipe on it, it would definitely alter the sound of the clarinet accordingly.
So if it is on a basso horn or a full boom clarinet, can it go as lower or not as low? I mean, I'm guessing that we haven't tried those out, but we did notice with the B flat and the A clarinet that it went down to the written A. So it did go a half step lower with the A clarinet than we would have had with the B. So the longer the instrument and probably the wider the bore, probably the lower you can go.
So as we heard it, I believe that was a low D, so D in the second register. The new sound that I could make, and I'm so excited that actually it happened in front of you the first time. So I didn't expect that, and I'm guessing that the same thing can happen on the A clarinet, or if you have a G clarinet or a basset horn, same thing.
We're at 4:30. So.
All right. So I really appreciate you all. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to Dylan or Chaba, and we're gonna switch over now to Chris Mothersoul's presentation. So thank you all for that. Okay, take it away, Chris.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jessica. And thanks to Chaba and to Dylan on that presentation too. I have a lot of experimenting to do on my basset horn now later. And so this presentation kind of unintentionally served as a follow-up to last year for New Music Weekend, actually, where Jenny Brandon and I had a conversation on writing and performing with effect pedals. And so as a part of that presentation, one of the topics that we went over was the fact that notation for this idea is just not quite standardized yet. There's a lot of different styles that composers will use to try and get the point across, because you have many different means of achieving these effects, whether it's through guitar effect pedals or through live audio processing software such as Ableton Live. So naturally, there's a lot of variation in terms of how composers describe these effects for their performers. And so I wanted to follow up on that and just go into some of the notation that I've come to use as I've learned how to do all of this and present these as sort of suggestions for potential standardization in the future. Even now, I realize that, there's still not a perfect solution, but I hope this provides some inspiration for composers and performers moving forward as the repertoire for this medium expands further. And so the idea of electroacoustic clarinet has come a long way, both performance-wise and compositionally, since say like the days of Bill Smith back in the 60s and 70s. And so in the early days, you start to see examples like, I think it's Bill's solo for clarinet and delay system, where he would essentially put little pictures of where each knob on each pedal needs to be set. So if he had a piece that was written for a certain pedal, you would see a little diagram to see where all of these needed to be set. And if you happen to have that pedal, it works out really well. But nowadays, with so many people using software and with pedals now taking many, many different forms. In fact, some reverb pedals have upwards of like 7 or 8 knobs sometimes, depending on the complexity of them. So the question begs, how do we try and find something that's both as clear as possible to performers, no matter who tackles the piece, but also something that is as simple and straightforward as possible too. And so to help demonstrate this, I want to go through the sheet music for a piece that I wrote just a few months ago called Demo. And so we'll go over little bits of the sheet music for that. We'll cover how all of these effects are used in the piece and how you see them notated. And so what I want to start off with, you'll notice that for this presentation, there's a PDF download for some supplemental material. We'll be referencing that quite a bit in this, but for those of you that aren't able to download it, I'll be screen sharing it as well as we go through. So the effect that I want to talk about first is going to be delay, because essentially this is probably the most widely used effect in solo clarinet repertoire, and composers are able to use this in quite a number of ways. And so naturally, as a result, there's a lot of different notation examples out there. And so the suggestion that I've come up with is essentially that no matter how many different knobs a delay pedal has, there's essentially two main parameters that control the sound that it outputs. And so the first is just simply the amount of time that it takes to repeat the sound back in the echo. So that first parameter in the box text is just described as delay time in seconds. So with this example here in the supplemental material, you'll notice that I've put the start of the delay effect in box text. This seems to be something that I've seen in a lot of different examples for solo clarinet music. I like the clarity of it in particular. It doesn't get confused with a lot of other things happening in there in terms of tempo and expression text. And so from here, you've got the 2-second delay time, and then you have the other parameter, which is the number of repeats. And this is one of the bigger difference makers in terms of how a delay effect can be used. So whether or not the echo is just going to come back once and be done, or is it going to repeat potentially like 7, 8, 12 times to really create a thick texture in a solo line. So I find that these are the two main parameters to experiment with and to notate in music that involves delay. And so we have our two parameters, and now you'll notice that I've put a little, essentially like a little oscilla line down in the bottom. And for pieces that involve a very specific use of delay in terms of rhythmic interaction, I found that to the performer, this is really helpful to see visually how the delayed sound lines up with what you're putting into it. So in this case, we have a visual representation of that sound coming back exactly 2 seconds later if we're at a quarter note tempo of 60 beats per minute. And then after that, once the delay establishes, this is something that was used actually in Sean Apevolo's Circle Play series, which I really liked a lot, and ended up borrowing that idea from. And so once it's established, you can just simply say, okay, the delay is going to keep going, but you get the idea. Now, a variation on that can be, say, if I wanted to set a delay up in a way that's less dependent on the number of seconds per se, but more the rhythm within the tempo. So if I wanted to set up a quarter note delay to represent a certain rhythmic interaction, then you see a variation where instead of listing the delay time in seconds, you see the delay time listed in terms of a specific rhythm. And when you hear of guitar players using delay a lot, they'll talk about delay in terms of this a lot. So whether or not it's a quarter note delay, a dotted eighth note delay, you'll hear this described in that sort of rhythmic interaction idea. So here, once again, you've got your delay time, number of repeats, and a little oscilla line telling you how this is going to interact with the sound that you're currently playing. It's a nice little visual representation of how essentially how your past self is interacting with your present self. And so one of the ways that delay is used in demo is to essentially set up an infinite self oscillation. So if we go down here and go to the very beginning of the piece, you'll see that I've got delay marked in a very similar manner. You've got your box text and you've got the time listed in half a second, but then you've got just infinite repeats. And what's going to happen with this is that this initial low E is just going to keep going and going and going, essentially almost kind of like a looper. But it's great for just setting a really thick texture for whatever's about to be played on top of that. And so for delay, that just about sums it up. Again, it's a very versatile effect. You just see it notated in a bunch of different ways, but those are essentially your two main parameters for that. And so moving forward, we've got a couple other different effects, one of which is distortion. And so for those of you unfamiliar with this effect, or simply overdriving the sound to the point that it's going to start to break up and clip the sound wave in a way that it just becomes really gritty, dirty, nasty, but kind of in a good way in terms of like rock and roll kind of sounds. So when I first got started with electroacoustic clarinet, this was naturally one of the effects I wanted to seek out first. And so unlike delay, where you have a lot of specific parameters that come in really handy for composition, such as delay time and number of repeats. Distortion, you don't necessarily have to describe this in such a specific way, because if we take something like this and I look at the knobs that are on here, the parameters are basically just going to tell me like, okay, how loud is it? How intense is the distortion? And what kind of tone color is the distortion going to take on, like bright versus dark and mellow? And so when I'm notating distortion in my music, I'm often just describing it as either a tone color or a feeling. And so basically within distortion, you can think of it as essentially different flavors of this effect, that there's 3 effects under that distortion umbrella. You have overdrive, which is essentially your milder type of distortion. It's just a light grit to the sound, but it's nothing too heavy metal, so to speak. After that, you have your traditional distortion, which you can describe it as sort of your middle of the road, where picture like your typical classic rock electric guitar shredding sort of tone, where it's breaking up a little bit more. It takes on a little bit more grit. And then you have your extreme end of this, which is an effect known as fuzz. And so fuzz is essentially like the spicy end of distortion. So it's going to become a lot more intense, typically a lot more fuzzy, angry sort of sound. You'll find this effect used a lot in hard rock and heavy metal in particular. And so in demo, what I wanted to do was use distortion in a way that's going to create that sort of thick, gritty sort of glitchy sound that you would hear in 8-bit video game soundtracks from the 80s and 90s, almost to the point where it sounds kind of synthesized when you put a clarinet through it. And so to go back to the supplemental stuff, that's where you just see, like, again, the box text, but I'm just describing distortion in just terms of simple descriptors. So light and reedy, or just mild distortion, or heavy fuzz. And this is just a few suggestions. It doesn't have to be anything specific. So after that, we'll describe one other effect, and then I'll play you the beginning of this piece real quick. And that is pitch shifting. So on top of distortion, I've combined this with an octave effect. And so the kind of the unique thing about pitch shifters is that, you know, it is much more expansive than just the octave. Potentially, there's a lot of pedals and effects out there that go specific into number of semitones, either upwards or downwards. Or say if you have a harmonizer pedal, you're potentially shifting the pitch in 2 different directions at the same time. And so when I'm notating pitch shifting in music, I'm describing this typically in terms of plus or minus number of semitones. So in this particular example, I've got it just set at -12, which is going to take me to the octave directly below that. And I went ahead and grouped some delay in there so that when you see the oscilla line here, not only is it delaying 1 quarter note, but it's also delaying the octave down as well. So you hear all of these effects used at the opening of demo. So you've got distortion and pitch shifting and delay all at the same time to create this thick, glitchy, sort of harsh texture in which you hear a more lyrical line played above that. And so I'm going to play this opening here real quick, and then we'll move on from here. And that gives us at least a little bit with the very opening. And so you'll notice that you've got one other type of notation in here, and you see these like little empty circles, filled in circles, these dotted crescendos and decrescendos. And this goes into an effect that honestly, I haven't really seen much of any example really in terms of notating this, and that is in terms of volume. And so just to explain how this works here for a second, for a volume pedal, this is essentially for a clarinet act as the volume knob on an electric guitar. So it gives me the ability to, when I've got it set down, then it's going to cut off all the effects and it's just going to be the acoustic side of the clarinet, versus if I start to press it on, it's going to fade into those effects, which gives me an added dimension whenever I'm using live effects like this. So I'm able to fine tune the volume and fade in and out of all of this stuff as I go. And so if anybody's seen any examples of this sort of notation, let me know, because I'd actually love to see how this is used in solo music. But what I've come up with is essentially a made up notation that I think for the time being, at least, is the most clear so far. And that is essentially treating it as dotted crescendos and decrescendos to show when these effects fade in and out. I wanted to create something visually that felt related to performing just traditional dynamics, but I wanted it to still be separated so that as I'm fading in and out of these effects, I'm not changing the dynamic that I'm personally playing on the clarinet. So with the empty circle, this is representing effects off, and the filled in circle giving me the full effect volume. So to give an in context version of how this is working in demo, again, I've got this infinite repeat that's set up on this low E. So I've got full effect here to give me this thick and reedy sound, but I don't want this to be a part of that repeat. So I'm taking off the effects and I'm cutting off the sound that's going into the delay pedal at that point, so that I'm able to freely play on top of this without any of this going into the delay pedal, because I've cut off the signal entirely with the volume pedal. So then as we go into here, the delay starts to fade in again, and all of this is going to start to pile on into the delay effect to create this really sort of chaotic sound. And I'll go ahead and rewind this for a second. So this is still the volume pedal all the way off, but now it's going to start to feed into the sound again on that infinite repeat. So this gives me a lot of control with my effects. Say if I especially don't have someone helping me out while using a computer on the side, I can just control all of this just with my feet. And so moving forward, we've got a couple other effects I went ahead and thrown in here as well. So we've got reverb. Again, this I've found personally, at least, that this doesn't have to be anything specific in terms of set parameters. I'm just describing this in terms of broad descriptions. So like a large hall reverb versus something just with a little bit of ring for something in a drier acoustic space. Or if I really want to go like really thick ambient and sort of washy with the sound, then I've got that option too. Another effect that you'll see in this piece is essentially a modulation effect. This is a wide group of effects that unfortunately is a topic for another day, but essentially the idea behind it is that you're creating slight pitch and time fluctuations to create texture in the sound. So a chorus pedal, for example, creates that sort of thick chorusy type of sound with slight little pitch modifications to add a little bit of texture to a solo line. And so you have a lot of effects like vibrato and phaser that are all kind of closely related to that. So I typically will describe this in terms of just modulation effect, and here's the type of it that's going to be used. Now, the last one I want to talk about is going to be, for me, one of the more fun ones that I honestly need to play around with more, and that's looping. And so for those of you unaware, essentially like loopers can take all sorts of different forms. There's really simple ones and there's really crazy ones out there. But they're almost all going to have the same basic functionality. So if I turn this one on, the first function is the record function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press this pedal once and it's going to record, oh, lights over here. It's going to record however much time of music that I want to. And once I'm done recording that, I'll press it again and it's going to play it back. So the light now turns green and it's just going to keep whatever I've recorded and it's going to put it on a loop for an indefinite number of, an indefinite amount of time. So if I wanted to pause it or stop it, I can double tap it and that's going to at least pause it for the time being. I can also erase the loop if I wanted to. But those are your two basic functions. You've got record and playback. Now, say if I wanted to stack more layers on top of that. So I'll go ahead and start the playback again. If I press this a third time, it's going to send it into what we know as overdub mode. So on top of my recorded loop, it's going to just keep adding layers every time that it loops back around again. So this is where a looper pedal becomes a lot of fun because as a single person, I can add as many layers as I want to give the illusion of a full ensemble sound, even though I'm just one person. And so with a looper pedal, those are your three main functions when I'm notating this sort of stuff. So recording the loop, playing it back, and then overdubbing on top of that. And so in the supplemental material, you'll see exactly that. So I've got box text to say, okay, here's what we're recording and here's when the playback starts. And much like with the delay, I've got a little ASCII line here to tell me how the recorded loop is interacting with whatever I'm playing in the present. And that playback can just continue however long I want to. Example 2 shows how I like to notate overdubbing. So if I've got a recorded loop and I send it directly into overdub mode, every double bar is going to signify when the loop just automatically starts over again, and it's going to record a new layer. And so with this ASCII line, you'll see that the recorded loop here is here, but then once this is finished overdubbing, it's going to stack on top of that. And then with the next double bar, this is going to stack on top of it, and then so on and so forth. So this, even if I added like a C drone here, it's also going to stack on top of that. So now all of a sudden, within the course of like 8 bars, I've now got 4 layers that are just going to play back however long I want to until I tell the looper to stop. And so what I want to do is we're going to start off kind of where we left off here, and then we're just going to listen along a little bit. I'm going to show you, you'll see all of these examples in action, where the playback and loop starts. Let's see if I can find the right place. Okay, here we go. So here's the top of the second page. For a little bit of dramatic effect there. I'm going to pause this just for a second, just make sure we've got some time for questions. But I do want to skip down a little bit. You'll notice that there's points where I just cut off all of these sounds and it becomes a little bit more ambient and acoustic coming up. I'm going to play you from this cadenza once, actually, because it's going to show again the possibilities of using looping, or sorry, volume to taper in delay effects again. And then this is where the looping gets more intricate as well. So here's the cadenza. Now we're setting up a 4-bar loop here that's eventually going to be overdubbed. Here's layer 2. Overdubbing, I'm just going to switch it back to playback. And that's the piece in a nutshell. It's such a wild ride. It's kind of like playing DDR and clarinet at the same time, but it's a good demonstration of essentially all of these effects combined. So I do want to answer a couple of questions that we've got in here before we, and there was one towards the beginning that I remembered. Dylan, your question seems to have kind of already been answered by Jason, but yeah, it kind of depends in terms of the latency of the pitch shifting. When pedal makers make pedals, they try and keep the latency to an absolute minimum, though there are some pedals that are a little bit more perceptible than others. With the octapedal I use, I don't really notice hardly anything. But there might be others out there that I haven't tried yet where maybe the latency is a little bit more noticeable. And that's when I'll just try out these pedals before I get them. So like going into Guitar Center and just getting weird questions from the guy at the counter when I explain to them a clarinet player trying to use distortion or pitch shifting. And then Daniel, you had a question about sending these notations to other people. I've done this for some of the effects and not all of them quite yet. When Jenny Brandon and I worked together, we worked quite a bit on the delay notation and the pitch shifting notation in particular. And the looping notation actually kind of is similar to a set of looping etudes that Josh Oxford composed a number of years back. In fact, if y'all have a chance, those are really fantastic for getting to know a looper pedal. So Josh Oxford's looping etudes for treble clef instruments. And then for those interested in my works like this, I'd be especially curious to get your thoughts on the volume effect notation as well. And it seems like, Jason, you've got some examples. Yeah, I would love to see that in terms of volume pedal control. It's one of those ones that just hasn't really appeared for me on my journey of finding pieces for this sort of stuff yet. And for CSABA, how would I define my genre? You know, I've been asking myself that same question for a while now, and the best I can describe is kind of as alternative classical. so that it's kind of starting to bridge that gap. Yeah, EDM clarinet, kind of bridging that gap between classical and say like 8-bit video game music to rock, that sort of stuff. I like to try and dabble in that cross genre collaboration as much as possible. So yeah, I'm still trying to define it. But yeah, alternative classical is probably the closest that I've gotten so far.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
yeah.
We're actually out of time, and our
Yeah.
next session is getting ready to start over on YouTube. So I'm going to drop the link in the chat here, and we will hopefully all head over there. We've got one more session following that for the day, and then we will kick back off tomorrow. So thanks to our presenters for this session. If you missed any of it, give me a little bit of time and I'll get them edited and uploaded to YouTube. And please feel free to contact the presenters with any questions you have about the stuff they showed off today. Thanks to everybody, and we'll see you over there on YouTube. Bye.
Bye, y'all.